So with that, I'd like to pass over to Peter and to welcome Ray Jarrett, who's our speaker. I asked Ray what he does, how he described himself. Would he describe himself as a digital media expert? He said, well, that among other things. And I think he's going to tell you a bit about his career and about his more recent involvement with education as well. So welcome, Ray. We look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Welcome, everybody. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you, Oliver. I'm just going to make sure Ray is unmuted.
Thank you, Peter.
Wonderful. Well, Ray, thank you so much for coming along to the Men's Fellowship and being willing to bare your soul, so to speak, to share your story. I take it if you weren't here with us now, you'd be doing laps of Centennial Park.
And I've done that already, Peter.
You've done that already?
Yes, yes.
Wow, what time were you out there?
5:15 this morning.
Wow, so that's your daily routine?
Yes, absolutely. It keeps me sane. Sane-ish, I trust.
Very impressive.
No. No.
I'm not in Sydney at the moment, but I gather it's not great weather. Was it a bit wet?
No, it was a bit wet, but it's a bit cooler, but it's fine. It's great being out in the green.
Great. Well, perhaps first up, could you, as Oliver said, you're a man of different backgrounds. So maybe could you give us a little bit of a window into what keeps you occupied and busy these days?
Apart from work at the moment, I'm writing strategies for a couple of schools. I'm automating a food manufacturing company at the moment and building an operating system for them. I'm the chair of the Cathedral School in Sydney. So good morning, Warren and Marcus, that I can see here. I'm the chair of the Teaching School Alliance. I'm the chair of the St Michael's Institute. I'm the chair of the Gawara School. So the Alliance trains Christian teachers. I've just joined advisory panels. I'm designing an MBA in Christian education with others at the moment. Bunch of stuff, whatever God calls me to do. So it's sort of wake up and run through the list every day.
So education seems to be sort of a constant theme there in what you said. I gather you were part of the establishment of an Indigenous school also at St Andrews. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Gawara is, Marcus, where are you? Help me. It's 13 years old at the moment, but about 15 years ago, we had been concerning ourselves with what people were calling the gap, the numeracy and literacy gap between Aboriginal children and the rest of the community. And a few of us decided it was time to stop talking and time to do something. We felt an imperative because we were a Christian school. And if Nelson Mandela is supposed to have said, if it is to be, it begins with me. So we looked for an opportunity and a place to put and start an Aboriginal school. And we ran into a whole lot of opposition from the local educational community, and ended up starting a small school on the premises at St Andrews. But it is been a separate registered school for some time now. It won the National School of the Year in 2020. And I think it's probably the best extant model for Aboriginal education in the country at the moment. But it's been very successful in terms of its outcome for its students.
What do you think some of the learnings have been over those 13 or so years?
It was clear when we began that there was a bunch of things about Aboriginal education which were culturally specific. So most of the people that we were dealing with were displaced, they were urbanised, they'd been disconnected from their culture. And it required us not to simply expose them to intensive numeracy or literacy training, but to actually reconnect them with their culture, which is something that we certainly needed help with. So the school has a carers and parents group, and we work with the Aboriginal community, but we do our best to make the education culturally specific, because part of it is actually reconnecting some of these children with their with their own cultures. The other part of what the school has had to do is to think about mapping Aboriginal spirituality with Western Christian norms. But it has, as I said, been tremendously successful. We have, I think, at least one student doing their PhD at the moment. We have one graduate who's just returned from a master's degree in Oxford, and she's starting another doctorate here in Sydney. So it works.
Thank you. Just as an aside, some of the men may know that Peter Gibbs has spoken in this forum, and Peter is an Indigenous leader from Dubbo. He's actually going to be giving the keynote speech at the Sydney Prayer Breakfast. So stay tuned for that if you want to hear Peter speak there. So, Ray, if we turn our attention to your own education, you did fine arts, and from there you found yourself working in the emerging digital space.
I graduated from the National Art School in 1973, and Wendy and I were engaged to be married, and I was a little bit in debt. And I could have gone to the Royal College in London to do some postgraduate study, and decided that I would have a career instead. I'd gone to art school because I was interested in photography. And I got a job in an advertising photography studio that I ended up owning, and I took it into digital media, which was just emerging in the early 80s, and we got involved in digital video and animation and on-screen interface design and a whole bunch of stuff. But that was sitting in a business which was largely analog. And in 1995, two of my long-term clients, Coca-Cola and AMP, said, what's this web thing? So Coke was having problems talking to institutional investors in Europe and in North America. The bottling arm, Coca-Cola Amatil, was having trouble talking to institutional investors. And AMP was looking at the online delivery of financial services. And about a week or two after that conversation, I picked up the phone in the office one day, and the lady she asked if it was me, and I said yes. And she said, well, I'd really like to work with you. I said, who are you? And she said, I'm Marnie Uccino. And I said, and who do you work for? And she said, I'm the head of digital for the Walt Disney Company. And they were looking for someone to relaunch the brand digitally in Asia and the South Pacific. And I had been recommended to them. So I stepped into that space, as you would, and worked with them for the next 15 years or so. But as the web emerged, we worked around the world I've worked for 26 out of the business units of the Walt Disney Company, but we've worked for banks, for retailers. We launched the NRL as a commercial online franchise in 2003. Ran that for a while, we've covered 4 Olympic Games and did the Torch Relay website for AMP, that sort of stuff. But it was
like a very busy time.
Well, it was, but it was interesting in as much as all these people had business issues which they were trying to address in the online space. So we learned together.
So what was give us a sense for sort of the lifestyle that you were then leading? You're talking about companies dotted all over the world. Was it a lot of travel?
There was, well, yes and no, Peter. One of the things the web did was to destroy geography. So borders didn't mean much anymore, and the clock didn't mean much anymore. I mean, that's a problem for companies today, having to deal with the fact that their customers expect them to be perpetually connected, always there, and always online. So yes, there was some travel, but I found that to be rather unproductive. So there was a lot of online calls. I mean, when we designed the data capture protocols for children for the Disney company, two of the management offices, one was in Los Angeles, one was in Orlando. The Disney office in Australia was in Melbourne. We were in Sydney. The test server was in Honolulu. The Disney Internet Group was run out of Tokyo, and the database group was running from London and Paris. So none of that seemed to bother anybody. We were all looking at the same thing at the same time. So it was a real education in the way the web has sort of unpacked and repacked business and the way we do things.
Do you, just as sort of an aside, do you have much opinion or thoughts on the use of data by some of the big technology companies? And
I do, yes.
See, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's websites work when they allow their users to do what they want to do easily and simply. So they're not necessarily fancy, but there's a lot of big money in this space, and the interaction creates rivers of data, and you can use it to manipulate interactions and to try and force people to think in a particular way. So I'm not sure that the big players in this space always use that power responsibly. To my mind, one of the things that struck me over the years was that the application of a sound Christian ethic to the way you treated people and the way you behaved in business actually led to far more success than trying to trick people into something or to use the data to manipulate their responses.
Well, speaking of success, your business became quite successful, as you've described, but there came quite a turning point for you. Yep. Share with us a little bit how that came about and what ensued.
I'm 70 now. So about 13, 14 years ago, one of my clients said, I want to buy your business and roll it into an IPO. And my business was a mum and dad business, really. You know, I got into the space without much business knowledge, but a fair amount of knowledge around the things that the business was doing. And I thought that, okay, this is an exit for me. So I agreed to that, and I sold half the business to one of the underwriters of the IPO just before, about 3 or 4 weeks before the IPO was supposed to happen, and it fell over. So I ended up with a business partner for the first time in 30 odd years, and a man from Goldman Sachs who had no idea how to run the business. And we tried to work together for about a year, but I got to a point where it was clear that we couldn't survive together. So we agreed to liquidate the business, which we managed with a fair amount of pain on my end. But about a month after the liquidation, my ex-partner sued me over some words in our sale of share contract, and I had to contest that. But because I was the director of a company in liquidation, I couldn't borrow money to address his demands or anything else like that. So we fought it legally, and in the end, I had to sell our house and lose most of my assets in that process. Which is not what you expect to do in your late 50s, but
no, particularly given that it was running so successly before.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we'll come back to that in a sec in terms of particularly how you then responded, say, over the last 15 years now or so. But take us back a little bit to your own upbringing and
Sure.
your parents. Tell us a bit about, your mum and your dad and your childhood.
I grew up on the edge of Sydney. My parents came from working class backgrounds, which I suppose that means I come from a working class background. I grew up in a suburb called Padstow, which was the edge of Sydney in those days. I remember going to St Mary's in Mount Druitt for a farm holiday when I was a kid. So it was, a normal 50s, 60s childhood, I suppose. My father, when I was 13, my father had been running he ran the Smith family's road network. and he got a job to run the NRMA's road network. And he took 2 weeks off and had a small cardiac event on the bowling green and ended up in hospital. And while he was in hospital, the NRMA fired him. And he was out of work for 2 years. My mother had to go to work in the local bakery. Dad became an alcoholic, became quite abusive during my teenage years. And it was at about the same time as I became a Christian. So it was a tumultuous time, my adolescence. But, I seem to have survived it.
Mm. That's quite devastating that your dad was sacked before he even started that role.
They sent him I was standing with him. The NRMA sent him a telegraph telling him he was no longer required, and they sent it to the cardiac ward at Bankstown Hospital. So it's not the sort of thing you could do these days.
No. You mentioned that it was around the same time that you became a believer, a Christian. So tell us what led to that journey.
My mother was nagging me to go to confirmation classes, and I was resisting as stoutly as I possibly could. And I was complaining about it to a friend at school, and Roger said, my mother's doing the same to me. So the two of us made a deal with our mothers that we would go to confirmation classes if they stopped nagging. And they agreed. I said to Mum, you nag, I will stop going to confirmation classes. So she stopped nagging. I went to confirmation classes, as did Roger, and we both became Christians. So that was when I was about 15. So it was, and I've been engaged, I've been a Christian now for 55 years and involved.
Wow. Okay. So you and perhaps your mother got more than you bargained for.
Well, I mean, look, I really think I think that's a good question. Neither of my parents went to church, but Dad died as a new young Christian. I was really very zealous with my father and did my best to convert him. And he always used to say, no, son, I've been there, done that. And he wouldn't talk about it. At his funeral, standing at the back of the chapel at the crematorium at Warrenora, there was a man that I didn't recognise. And this man, whose name was Stephen, stayed back until the end, until after everyone had left. And he walked up to me and he showed me a photograph of my father as a young man. And he said, "Is that Sid?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Well, I had to come today to tell you that your father saved my life." And I looked at him and said, "My father? How?" And he said, "Well, your father was the head of Christian Endeavour in Sutherland during my teenage years. And he led me and many others to a saving faith in Jesus Christ. Your father saved my life and many others." And I must admit to being quite surprised by that. And my mother and he met in church. And I've found since Dad died, as you go through his things that they exchanged when they were much younger, that showed me that they were actually actively engaged in their local church in Rockdale at that stage. And I can only imagine that the experiences of the war, changed Dad's attitude to that. But thankfully, I'm exceedingly grateful that my mother died in 1984 when we were all quite young. But between then and when my father died, I had a chance to talk to him about a lot of stuff. So when he died, there was nothing left unsaid between he and I, and nothing unresolved. But I think when I think about Dad, I'm immensely proud of him, despite the problems he had with alcohol when I was young. And I think that the things that I have done are partly down to him and his attitude. He doesn't, I mean, I believe we have a biblical imperative to not stand back, but to engage, to act and do and to leverage what we know and what we believe. And I think that comes from my father. Well, it's a thing that he taught me.
Well, picking up on that, you found yourself 15 years ago or so in rather a big hole.
Yep.
Bit different to the hole that you've got as your background there, but perhaps there's a connection. This would have had huge financial and social consequences. You mentioned that you had to sell your house. Must have, your wife, family, etc. Must have, big impact. So, how did you respond? And how bad did really things get?
The year before we liquidated the business, I was not paid, so I didn't receive a cent out of that. Wendy found a job, and I found a bunch of small jobs, casual jobs, before and after my normal work day. So I just kept on going. So the business, a lot of my clients said, we'll continue to work with you. In fact, we want to continue working with you. So I stepped sideways through the liquidation, but defending the legal action cost me everything we had. And that was it was a huge burden, taught me a great deal. Taught me, it completely refocused my attitude to money. And it completely refocused the measures of success that I applied to myself. And it made me think about the things that actually endure and the importance of my faith. Because I think Dad buckled in the face of circumstances because he'd been deprived of hope. He'd had that taken away from him. And my hope remained, I was going to say solid. My hope certainly took a battering. And during that difficult time, I had a lot of friends who didn't know how to handle with it, so they simply withdrew and stepped back. Others did not. And you just keep on going, I never was willing to simply lie down in the face of it, because I live a life beyond myself and I have a hope beyond the circumstances of this life. And I think that kept me upright and moving forward.
What about for your wife?
Harder. I think it was exceedingly difficult for her. But we will be married. We've been married 48 years this year. So I think it's, and I think the other thing that I found surprising was the number of friends who'd been through similar things and had done it on their own. The best piece of advice I got in the middle of all this was from a man who had been completely wiped out, and he'd fallen much further than I had. But Rob came up to me one day and put his arms around me and said, listen, mate, the only thing I can say to you that I think has any value is that it ends. And he was right. So.
And can you give us a sense for when you say it ends, is that's a finite time period, or is it still ending? No. Well, it's certainly changed the way I work. It's changed the amount of money I earn. It may never end, but it is no longer the biggest thing on my landscape. There are plenty of other things that have just pushed it into the background. I mean, one thing I guess I'd like to ask.
Ask anything.
Yeah, it would be easy to be quite resentful, perhaps, of those that caused your demise, or perhaps resentful of others who've been more successful, so to speak. How do you?
I've worked for myself all my life virtually, and one of the things I enjoy about that is that if you make it, you make it because you've done it, you've been successful, and if you fail, it's because you've failed. So I have a number of friends whose careers have been decimated by decisions made sometimes in another country, have had their jobs disappear or their roles taken away from them. I felt I was very conscious of the mistakes that I thought I had made, but they were my mistakes. So no, I don't. I've never felt any resentment. My business partner came from Melbourne. There was a time where I couldn't go to Melbourne without getting angry, but that's gone too. But no, I don't. I have never felt that God has withdrawn from me, and I've never felt that God was not guiding me, and I've never felt that God didn't care. The feelings I've had is, I suppose, is that he cared about the things that were important to him weren't necessarily the things that were initially important to me.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever met that business partner from Melbourne again?
No.
Is that something you contemplate?
No, I'm not looking. I wouldn't look forward to it, but I don't resent. I don't resent his actions. He certainly, his behaviour was without malice. I think it was. He was travelling, driven by his own values and his own standards. So no, I don't go to bed angry.
That's good. You mentioned your attitude to money and success have changed. So how would you contrast what you previously thought to what you now think?
I have an abiding interest. I've always had an abiding interest in things that work. I don't have much patience with persisting with something which is actually not delivering or functioning. So that in business, I just let the business grew organically, and the number of staff grew organically and all the rest of it. And I would measure it. You'd measure it financially, I suppose, how well you were doing, the sort of work you were getting and the accolades that you were receiving, and what your clients and other people said about you. But much of all of that is transitory. I think it's stuff that can be taken away from you. So I still measure my success in terms of producing outcomes that function and deliver. But in the volunteering stuff that I've been doing, with the school, with the Teaching School Alliance, and with the St. Michael's Institute, I look for outcomes that are ones that please and honour God. So at the Cathedral School, we've been discussing the nature of Christian education for a decade at least. And lots of schools do that. But we looked at the research that was coming out of North America and Europe, and there seemed to be a great gap. The research into Christian education would suggest that the quickest way to inoculate a young person against the gospel is to teach them the Bible. So if that's all you do in a school, then you probably produce an attitude towards the Christian faith. It's like a garment that a young person takes off and hangs on a hook when they leave school. That education is partly, half of education is the sort of expert transfer of content, but the other half is the formation of the person on the other end of it. So the formation of young men and women in schools, what sort of graduates you produce when you're doing that. And that meant that we needed a sustainable supply of really, really high quality teachers who could teach anything from a Christian worldview. And we approached, I'll use the word secular, but we approached the secular universities to see if they were interested in working with us, and none of them were. Didn't have the slightest interest in what we were trying to do. So the obvious answer to that situation was that we'd have to do it ourselves. And I drew together 14, 15 schools, and we talked for nearly 2 years about how we might do this. We were working in partnership at that stage with Alpha Crucis, still are. And we are now an alliance of Scots College, Inverborough, William Clark, Blue Mountains Grammar School, the Cathedral School, PLC at the moment, and a bunch of other schools who are training Christian teachers in a new non-residential way. The federal government has identified the model of teacher training we're doing as best practice and is putting money into Alpha Crucis's network of teacher training, and we're trying to establish this as a model for just generally teacher training. But around the country, we've got, there will be hubs starting in Tasmania and Queensland later on this year. But what we're doing and what we've done is actually identify a stream of young Christian people who are called to teaching, and we're delivering undergraduate degrees and master's degrees, mainly master's degrees at the moment in teaching. And it's having a profound effect on the schools that are involved.
So I can see your passion for education is coming back out again.
Sorry, forgive me. I'll sit down.
That's all right. That's all right. I'll ask one last question, and then
Sure.
I invite the men to use that raised hand function if you'd like to ask Ray a question. So please do think of what you may wish to ask. But my last question, Ray, would you, in some ways, looking back now, say that you're thankful for the experience
Yes.
that you went through with?
Yes, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So why would you say you're thankful?
Because I think it challenged it challenged the whole. When you're busy, when you're in business, you move it forward, and you lose sight sometimes of the edge of things, and you often lose sight of what's really important. And I think that apart from the pain of working through what was a really very difficult time, it forced me to reassess personally a whole host of things. So I'm not sure that and even from a business sense, the digital delivery business that I was involved in has changed so radically that I suspect that the business as it was shaped then probably would not have survived. I would have had to do something different. So the wisdom of hindsight gives me a perspective that I suppose that contributes to my lack of resentment as well. I've got a perspective now of what has occurred to me and the changes that it's actually, the changes that have been made, but also the way it equipped me to move in particular areas and particular directions. So no, don't regret it.
Well, that's a wonderful attitude to have. May we all think that way, because no doubt no one is immune to those sorts of setbacks. So I'd like to invite the men to ask any questions. So would anyone like to use the raise hand function? And so I can see a question from Ken. I'm just going to ask to unmute.
Thanks, Peter. Ray, thanks for your openness to questions this morning. Just a question, you talked about technology destroying geography and destroying the clock effectively, and I can identify with that in my career as well. But can you then apply that to your other passion for education? You've talked about the training of teachers, you've talked about the necessity of forming character. How does the technology that you are famous for and so involved in play into that big agenda of?
Well, we're doing it. We're doing it now, Ken. I think, in a sense that the internet allows us to gather as we have now. We are ignoring geography, coming together in this group of 77 men. But I think that that's bringing a whole bunch of challenges. So that I'm working on a national framework for training lay ministers, for licensed lay ministry. And it will only be deliverable using online delivery because there are not, major resources to apply to that sort of thing. So it has been a huge gift. It's allowed some churches to continue in the face of COVID restrictions. And I think that the response of churches across the country to the pandemic has been pretty varied. But in the church, in my own church, what we've got is an emerging sort of multi-stream congregation, and part of that congregation is a baked-on online congregation. So it's going to make being a church and ministering to one another and maintaining a fellowship like this easier on the one hand, but harder on the other, because it's not the same as being in the same, physically in the same space and being able to look each other in the eye.
Ray, what about the character formation part of Ken's question?
Well, character form, you have to. The head of a large Anglican school once said to me that he thought that character formation in education was a load of hooey. All you needed to do was to put boys in a uniform, give them a drum or a gun and march them up and down in lines. And that formed character pretty damn quickly. But if we are, the important bit of education is in the development and formation of a whole bunch of soft skills. And character is one of those. So schools and churches, whatever, need to decide on the things that are necessarily important and enduringly important. We are asked to treat each other justly, to walk humbly. And there's whole slabs of the New Testament of peons to how interdependent we are and how submissive we should be to one another's needs and cares. And if you go to form character, then you need to model it. And in an educational sense, you need to work really very hard to integrate, to understand what it is you're doing, articulate it, integrate it with the way you teach. One of the leading researchers in Christian education is a guy called Jarrett, who was a science teacher. And he, a Christian science teacher, and he got engaged because he was teaching lessons in gestation. And they were doing it with fertilized chicken eggs. And the lessons meant that every week they had to kill chickens, basically. And he found that he was getting distressed. About a third of his class was getting distressed at the idea of killing something to learn. A third of his class couldn't care less. And a third of his class were looking forward to killing more chickens every week. And he actually went to his head of department and said, I'm really disturbed by this. And his head of department, to his credit, said, okay, Trevor, find another way. So that, say, at the Cathedral School, we've highlighted the character formation that we would like to see in young people. And we work really very hard to integrate it into the classroom experience and to integrate it into the way we teach and into the pedagogy and into our co-curricular stuff. And having to teach remotely has meant that we have had to model levels of care and attention that our parents and students have recognised. So I think lots of educational institutions use the word authentic, but that's about walking the talk, Ken, I think. You can, it's an increasingly complex challenge to actually deliver that sort of thing online, but you really need to think about it and articulate it in the first place. It's a very planned, structured thing. Happy to have an offline conversation if you want to.
A question from Phil.
Hi, Ray. Can you hear me, Ray?
I can.
Yeah, hi, Ray. Yeah, so I'm in similar background here in digital media.
Yep.
I started my career when the internet was a teenager, which was around 98. Created the first e-commerce, dutyfree.com.au in Australia.
Yep.
So my question is, and thank you for going through the journey where you ran your business and you found that God's word is much, much more permanent than any success that you have in any of your endeavor. If you had to do that again, how would you run your business? That's one question.
So that's a really good one. Sorry, go on. Yes.
The other one is in the context of today with COVID, I'm heavily involved in education online as well, like just making sure how to understand engagement with students or companies and their learners. What are the technologies, or what are, I guess, when you talk about authentic learning, what are your advice in terms of engaging the people who want to learn in digital media?
To answer the first part of your question, would I do things differently? Probably. Probably. I think my wife would certainly wish that I worked for somebody else and never worked for myself. Would I willingly walk through the pain? Would I open that door with a smile on my face? No, I think I'd be quite hesitant to do that now. However, in all the digital transitions that I have helped manage, I've never had a technical problem. There's never been a technical issue that was insurmountable. The problems have all been cultural. So I think, and that's the soft sort of stuff that I was talking about. I've done a lot of work in the aged care industry, and they have huge issues with staff training, because it's not a very attractive sort of industry, and they've got a lot of people for whom English is a second language. And they think that purchasing a technology platform, like let's go out and buy 500 smartphones and put an app on it that will manage scheduling and stuff like that, never works. Largely in the one case I can think of is because they didn't train people in how to use the technology. So I think it's a really, Phil, I think it's a complex mix. Culturally, you've got to define that. You've got to understand that. You've got to make certain that any technology you deploy reinforces the values and standards of the culture. So it's not, I don't think it's enough just to say, yes, this technology gives you the capability to do something. It's got to be done in a particular way for people to pick it up. Because that's the thing that a lot of particularly traditional marketers didn't understand as the web grew, was that they'd lost volition completely. So that traditionally you could spend a lot of money and compel people to pay attention to what it was you were saying. But with the moment the web comes up, you can't. You can't force people to do what you want them to do. You can't force them to look at what you're doing in order. And if you try and compel reaction to your benefit, they'll just walk away. They won't do it. So technology will allow you to deliver or sell anything anywhere, largely. But if you promise something and don't deliver, that doesn't work. I really, honestly, have been convicted a long time ago. But when I took over the NRL in 2003, they had about 200,000 visitors a month. They had 13,000 people in a database. And the NRL paid me a lot of money to build this big website because they had 2.5 million people going to games, loved their clubs, hated the league, largely because of the Super League debacle. And the league said, we need, we've got to do this, 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 and this. And they paid me a 7-figure sum to build them a website. I sat and watched it for a week and I knew they were wrong. So I actually went to them and said, I think this is wrong. This is on the basis of the traffic of what I was looking at. So I paid to rebuild the website. And within 12 months, we'd grown the 13,000 people to 1 million they were generating money. We'd multiplied traffic by 20 times more than that. And it just kept on growing. That was not because the thing was beautifully designed or it was overcomplicated. It was just that we're giving people what they wanted. And we made it easy for them to do it. The same with some retail stuff. I built a whole lot of test retail play. I was Westfield's lead retail developer when they got into the space. I did some stuff for Best and Less, but the first Best and Less sites that we built were very, 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 very low key and very poorly. Well, they were carefully designed, but they weren't sort of very rich or very polished. But they became the largest outlets in the entire network in under a year, and that was largely because we understood what the people we were talking to wanted. Does that sort of answer your question, Phil-ish?
Phil's been muted again.
Sorry.
I think it will answer it.
Good.
As you spoke about the NRL, I was just wondering whether you could take on the much bigger task of working on character formation for the NRL, but we won't go there.
Can I just say that I had a number of journalists working for me, and one of them was interviewing Shane Webke one day, and she stood up and she said, "I have to go for a walk." And I said, "Are you all right? Was he kind to you? Did he say anything wrong?" And she said, "No, he used the word ethos and he used it in context and I'm struggling." So I'll let it go for a walk in the sun. So the NRL is a whole other story, but still.
Okay. Well, Ray, thank you so much for sharing on a number of levels. Your professional expertise, of course, but also much more importantly, really what you went through and the impact that had and why you still have hope through the midst of this really trauma that you went through. And you're still working, you're still positive, you're still doing laps of Centennial Park. So
I'm off to the gym now. Are you coming? Well, I see you. No, you're on the Central Coast. Okay.
Yeah. So looking forward to catching up for that coffee we promised.
Okay. Thank you.
Oliver asked the question at the outset, why the removal of the beard? I don't think anyone's really interested, but the simple answer is happy wife, happy life. So that's why there's no more beard. I'm going to ask Richard Wheeler. Richard introduced the idea to me that Ray should speak this morning, and so it'd be appropriate to ask Richard to close with a very short prayer. Before he does that, let me just say what you can expect in a month's time when we next get together in the Men's Fellowship. We're going to have our speaker come in from the States. He is Warwick Fairfax, which is a name probably known to most people who are probably over about the age of 50. Perhaps you can research who he might be. So he'll be our speaker next month. Do follow up with the email that I'll send out later this morning. Take up the opportunity to join one of the small groups, and it'll be a great opportunity for you to get to know the other men, excuse me, and also to think through some of the things that Ray has shared this morning. So stay tuned for that. Richard, could you do the honours, please?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Our Father, we thank you that Ray has been able to join us today. We thank you for his willingness to open up to us and to share with us the highs and the lows. We thank you especially, Father, that you stood beside him during the very difficult times in his life and his business. And we praise you for the lessons which Ray has taken out of that and is now applying in his life. And we thank you for the opportunities that he has now in education and particularly in secondary education, Father, to be able to bring kids up in a way where character is formed. And we ask that you would bless his ministry in that and all the other things that he is doing as well. And we pray, Father, also that you would help us to think about the things that Ray has said and to apply it to ourselves. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Richard. Thanks again, Ray. And gentlemen, have a great day. And
thank you, everyone.
Seeing you again.
God bless you.